Hello, my creative friends, and welcome to another episode of The Daily Prompt. I recently, on one of the recent episodes, had a comment from someone asking me to elaborate on subplots. So I thought I'd make a quick little video talking about subplots, how to create kick-ass subplots, and how to make sure that your subplots are, in fact, serving your story. So subplots kind of mess people up a little bit, in part because a subplot needs to serve the main plot. A subplot is a secondary storyline, and depending on the needs of the story, depending on the pace of the story, depending on the characters, depending on what's happening in your story, you may or may not want to cut away to different subplots. So what is a subplot? A subplot is basically a story, just like your main story. You have your main plot, which is what your movie is ultimately about. The main plot is what is going to convey the meaning or the message or the point or the purpose of your story. So the main plot is the character in pursuit of something, some set of circumstances or situation happens to the character, and they have to respond to that. They have to overcome that. They have to either get or not get their goal. Subplots are parallel storylines that happen perhaps to other characters within your story, that can perhaps happen completely detached from your story, but maybe reflect an aspect of the theme. So for example, if you had one of the examples I always like to use, so you'll hear me say it ad nauseum, my apologies if you've heard it before, is if you had a story whose theme was, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And so you're going to show a character going through an experience that basically teaches him that lesson. If that's what your main storyline is, to fill out your story, you may want to have a subplot that shows the opposite journey, or what seems to be the opposite journey that ultimately offers a different angle on but supporting view of that same theme. One of the classic ways to use a subplot is if you have a character pursuing a goal and you have some opponent character, a villain, or just maybe a nice guy who happens to want the same thing that your character wants, you might have a subplot about that character's journey. And in that way, you show counterpoints. In that way, you show what that character's doing, which must really doesn't have to be. There's no musts, there's no rules, but which can make your main storyline stronger. So if your character's going along in their journey and they have a bad guy villain getting in the way, if we cut away to a subplot storyline where we see that villain's motivation such that maybe the villain has a point, maybe they should get that thing, well then what we've done now is enhanced our main character's journey. We've enhanced their storyline by demanding more of their reasoning to get the thing that they need. So for example, hopefully that makes sense, but for example, if you have a character who wants to win a race and he wants to win the race, and as we're watching him, there's this other guy who wants to win the race too, and that guy's always getting in his way and being the bad guy. But then we cut to a subplot storyline with the bad guy, and we see that he needs to win the race because he needs to have some money to pay for a sick sibling or something. So suddenly that bad guy's, that opponent's reason for getting there is pretty strong. Now what we're going to need is for the main character in that main storyline to have an even greater need, or to overcome the obstacle in some other way. It doesn't always have to be this story. I'm trying to elucidate how to use subplot and how the subplot can impact upon the main plot. Now, where do you find subplots? We have an exercise in Fast Screenplay in one of the story development phase, the focus phase exercises, where we basically create a web and we figure out how characters are all related to each other. And in that way, we can figure out what natural subplots would come out of the main storyline. In Fast, we start with an idea and we grow it organically into a story. So we find our subplots organically as well. You can find subplots any way you want to. You could create 3 parallel storylines and simply cut back and forth between them. In TV, that traditionally how television's done. You have your A storyline, you have your B storyline, you have your C storyline, and you would cut back and forth between them. So at some cliffhanger moment of a point of interest, when the audience is most excited about what it is, we cut away to another story and we build that up. And in that way, we're forever keeping the audience there with us. That's in feature film storytelling, that's often referred to as episodic writing, because the writing doesn't seem to be interconnected. If you can tie all those loose ends together at the end, or maybe it starts all together and it splinters out, so you have multiple storylines, what this will help you do is cut back and forth. So if you have sustaining an audience's interest for an hour and a half is one of the grand challenges of writing movies, of writing screenplays. So to have subplots that themselves have something at stake, that themselves have a character in pursuit of some goal, that themselves have a rich story that you can cut back and forth between, is really a great way to fill out the story itself. One of the big challenges is that we need to make sure that those different subplots are somehow related in some way to the main storyline, because that's what's going to give us a cohesive story. If you have just splintered subplots that don't really connect, it's a very easy way for the audience to afterwards start dissecting it and try to figure out, well, what was the relation of that? This movie was all over the place. I'm sure you've gone to movies and you thought that movie was all over the place. That's probably what's happening. So if you think about a subplot itself, a subplot's going to have a beginning, a middle, and end as well, like all stories will. With the subplot, you don't necessarily need to see all those details, though. What you need to see in the subplot is the most relevant parts of those story that impact upon the main storyline. So, for example, if your character did something to slight the bad guy, and your character, perhaps inadvertently, perhaps accidentally, did something that made the opponent character just, I'm gonna beat that person, right? So now you have this villainous character. We don't necessarily know that character, or the character doesn't know that they're the one that set that in motion. So you have a question. Do you want to show that moment so that we, the audience, know that this is part of that secondary subplot, that villainous character's storyline? Is that going to help us to enhance our feelings for that character? Is it perhaps going to give us too much sympathy for the villain character? So we maybe don't want that. That'll be something we'll discover later in the process. So we can later in the story have that moment of, oh, I slighted you back then. I caused this. That could be a great revelation moment in a story. We always want stories to be a step ahead of the audience. We always want the stories to deliver to an audience an extraordinary experience. We want the audience to feel something. So if you're asking the audience to care about your main storyline, and then ultimately you create a subplot that's more compelling, well, then that should probably be your main story. You got to watch out for that, because it's very easy for a secondary story to supersede the main story. So when designing it, there's no real definitive, here's a set of rules I can give you, because that's not what I believe about screenwriting. That's not how it works. There's no put this on this page in storytelling and screenwriting at all. Anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't understand the stuff as well as they think they do. A subplot itself is ultimately a secondary storyline, secondary to the main storyline, and secondary only because the story that you're trying to tell and convey to the audience is that main storyline story. So when you create your subplots, always think of them as their own story, but think about which parts of that story is going to help you tell your main story more effectively, whether from a pacing perspective, maybe from a suspense perspective, maybe from a character development perspective, just maybe from a plotting perspective. Maybe we need to know what happened over there to really understand the logistics of how this is unfolding over here. So in that way, you can look for subplots through how the characters know each other, the more you fill out your world, the more you understand the world and how everybody's connected to it, the more opportunity for subplot you'll see. The better you understand your theme or what you're trying to say, or the point or the purpose of your story, the more you can say, well, what's a counterpoint to that? What if I'm making a certain argument? If you just make one argument, a lot of writers start out, they want to make a message film. So they have a message they want to convey. And so they just convey that message. And any opponent character is very weak because they have to be weak to drive home this message. The way you're going to drive home that message is going to show all the different points of view and show opposing points of view powerfully, so that when we see both points of view and then we see the story that you've told shows us this point of view is the way, that's going to convey your message more effectively than if you just only show this. If you can show that opposing point of view, often you can do that in a subplot. Often you can do that thematically in a subplot or through a character subplot. So in summary, when it comes to subplots, think of them as their own stories. And think about how they would relate to and interact with your main storyline to help serve it, to help enhance it, to offer a counterpoint to it, or perhaps strategically in a sort of logistical way, how could you maybe creatively weave together subplots so they come together for a dramatic moment that conveys the thing that you're trying to convey, or the big twist, or the big reveal of your story. So subplots can be a little bit tricky. Certainly mastering them does take time. And it's not just in the story development phase that we need to figure it out. Once you weave a subplot into your story, you really need to be thinking throughout the process of, you need to keep coming back to it. And you need to keep reassessing, how is this impacting? And maybe things change over time. You invent a subplot and it makes such a mark on the thing that over time you go, I think this is the story I should be telling. Well, then you have to think about, if that's the story I'm telling, what does it mean for the main storyline and how it serves what was originally the subplot? It's a challenging thing. It takes time, as all this stuff does, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight, a little bit of ideas in how to create some kick-ass subplots. Always use all the skills and ideas and techniques and strategy and process from regular storylines, right? So your main storyline, all the tools you use to make that extraordinary, infuse all of that into your subplots as well. Because the stronger you make your subplots, the stronger you make your overall story, and the more likely your audience will be to want to stick with you throughout the entire thing. So hopefully this helps. Take this as today's daily prompt. As always, if you want to join me, sign up for Fast Screenplay, and we'll go all the way through the entire process and into the writer's room, where we'll make a film that you write at the end. Other than that, you can do it your own way if you like. I just ask that you subscribe, click the little bell, like and follow and all that kind of stuff, and take action. It's not enough just to watch these videos. It's not enough to just get a feeling of juice every day. The way you develop this craft is you take action every single day. That's why this is called the Daily Prompt, to prompt you into action. So when this video is done, don't click on the next one unless it's one of mine for view time for the YouTube algorithm. Otherwise, once you're done, take action today. We'll see you tomorrow, or when the next video comes out.